Welcome to What Not to Do. I'm Kyle Schmitz, and this is episode 1. I'm so excited to be here. I'm excited you're here. And today I've got Ryan Hatch. He's an entrepreneur, product strategy consultant. We're going to talk failure. We're going to talk why failure. Why even talk about it? Stay tuned. Here we go. Man, I'm excited. We are sitting at Prohibition
Cigar bar.
We're smoking Fat Bottom Betties. We are sipping on Knob Creek smoked maple whiskey.
Syrup whiskey.
It's basically like maple syrup and whiskey. If we had pancakes, it'd be even better. I couldn't think of a better way to be able to, kick off the podcast, or just have a podcast. I mean, the setting for the conversation, all that kind of stuff is amazing. And if you guys don't know, I'm Kyle Schmitz, and I've got with me Ryan Hatch. Ryan, there's a specific reason why I wanted Ryan on the podcast today. He's built businesses, he's sold businesses, he helps advise major businesses on product innovation and strategy and execution. He is well acquainted with all things what not to do, and he also asks fantastic questions. And so he's going to help me kick off the introductory podcast. But Ryan, thanks for joining me, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, Kyle. It's an honor to be here with you.
Smoking sticks.
Fat
Bottom Betty.
I don't come here that often. This is my first time here,
yeah.
And I've never heard a cigar referred to as a stick. I like that.
Well, we can change that, right? We can get you here more often.
And what are we here to talk about today, Kyle? What is this podcast about?
Yeah. Well, before we get into that, why don't you tell our listeners just a bit more about who you are? I kind of covered it at high point, but who's Ryan?
Sure. So, my high-level story is I used to be a software engineer and used to write code. I wrote writing code when I was 12, and I was really curious about how things worked. But in college, I never wanted to be the one to just sit behind a desk and be a code monkey, right? Yeah. I was always interested in what's the intersection between business and tech, and that's driven me throughout my career path. And I had a failure first thing out of college. Is you just come out kind of like guns blazing, and we'll talk more about that in a different episode. But I had a failure early on, and it was really hard, and it's something that people don't talk enough about.
Yeah.
These are things that we talk about success, which is great. But this other side of the coin, on the failure side, and why, and how to deal with it, and what it can do for us.
All to think about it.
Yeah. Right. So a couple years after that, did another startup. We raised venture capital and grew that business. So I shifted into a product role, product management, and that was a big shift. Yeah. Into learning about the market and customers and how do we understand not just how do we build stuff, but what do we build, and so the company grew. We built that business. We grew. I shifted into a growth role, and then we sold that business, which has been great. And I've been doing corporate innovation, product strategy kind of stuff since.
Yep.
That we'll talk more about later, but. That's a little bit about me, but Kyle, this is your podcast.
It is my podcast.
And the listeners don't know anything about Kyle.
Nada. Scratch. I'm a stranger.
Who is Kyle? And what motivated you to want to start a podcast on failure?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a bit about me, born and raised in the Green Bay, Wisconsin area. I've moved to Minneapolis. I had a little stint in college there, moved back to Green Bay. A couple years later, moved back to Minneapolis, then moved back to Green Bay. Then I went down to Birmingham, Alabama. Then I went back to Green Bay, and then went back to Minneapolis for 8 years. Wow. And found a wife, started some babies, and that's a business in and of itself, right? And then we were back here in Green Bay, and we love the little bit slower pace of life, and it's great. In my life, I probably had more jobs than birthdays. And that's funny because it's true, right? And so, but grew up in life and didn't have clear direction. In high school, I did not really give regards to my studies. Really undervalued education and learning, which is kind of funny given who I am now. But I didn't. I thought I was going to be a rock star someday, and just kind of devalued stuff. Just squeaked by.
If you don't know Kyle, which you don't yet, but you're about to learn that he's a master musician and an incredibly talented guy. So you thought you were going to be a rock star.
I did, and that's very very gracious of you. But thought I was going to be a rock star. Squeaked by with a 3.1 in high school and didn't do anything. And if that's one thing, just looking back, a failure that I made was, in a sense, I gave up on myself. I really didn't give mind to my capacity and to really, but also not to have, didn't have a clear vision of what I wanted in life. And I think maybe a lot of people, even maybe who are listening, maybe you guys struggle with that too. You're not really sure where you're going in life, what you want out of life. And so I would kind of pinball my way, through life, zigging, zagging here, trying to figure it out, right? And I didn't have a coach, a teacher, a mentor in my life that was helping to give direction. I didn't know what I needed in that sense, And somewhere along the way, was never a reader and woke up one morning and said, I want to read a book. Maybe I thought it was kind of cool, like sitting in a coffee shop and sipping my espresso or whatever it is and reading a book, kind of but it birthed a love of reading in me and reignited this cavernous capacity for learning. And it's just amazing. Since then, it's the kind of the wildfire of intellectual curiosity has just taken me and really realized I've had so much to learn. And that has even stemmed through present day where, I'm running this podcast. I'm starting this podcast not because I have success. I'm actually still looking for that myself, right? Still clarifying and still working towards the things.
And aren't we all?
Right, exactly.
Because none of us are complete. Right? We all have more to do.
Yeah, exactly right. And so there's two major aims in this podcast. One, it's actually for me. I'm pretty selfish. I'm doing this because I want to learn. Right, and there are folks that have been in the trenches, but they've had success, and finding ways just to be able to learn and grow and learn from their examples, get to know them, and then see how I can apply those principles in my own life. Right, some things that growing up or even in my early adult years, I didn't have. But then also this podcast, even more so, is about you, the listener, because I imagine that I'm not the only one out of 7 billion people in the world. That are designed to learn, and they don't have someone they can learn from, right? I've heard it said, don't take advice from someone you wouldn't trade places with, and wherever you might be on or at in your journey, are you taking advice from someone that you say, I want to be like them? And my hope is that as I interview entrepreneurs, leaders, public figures, that there are going to be those that are aspiring to be entrepreneurs, leaders, public figures in some capacity, some way, shape, or form. They're going to latch onto an episode and say, man, Ryan Hatch changed everything for me, right?
Kyle Schmitz
changed everything, whoever it might be, and be able to, in a sense, kind of broker that relationship for those who have had success and willing to pass on not just what to do, right, but what not to do.
Right.
And so that's kind of the...
And you had a great quote. It was... something about not making mistakes yourself, but learning from others. What was the quote?
Yeah. So it riffs off an old saying that goes, good men learn from their own mistakes, but great men learn from the mistakes of others. And so the idea is that as we aspire in life throughout our various ambitions, going after our calling or whatever our main goals in life are, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to have failures, right? But necessarily because we are being ambitious and aspiring to build, to go after something, we are taking on more risk. All of life is risk, right? And so naturally we want to mitigate risk. One of the best ways to do that is to learn from the mistakes of others so we don't have to repeat them. Why? We're going to have enough of our own mistakes. We're going to have enough of our own failures. Right. Why commit the same mistakes and failures because of our own ignorance or because of our own unwillingness to have learned from others.
Yeah.
It's so huge.
If life is a minefield, right, you want to know where the clear path is, right? You want to follow in the footsteps of those who've made mistakes and avoid those, right, and learn from those.
That's exactly right. And then, I mean, even thinking through, so in my years of learning and reading and all that kind of stuff, guys like Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, taught me a lot to think through this concept of mental models, right? And so, like, when we make a decision in life, we make millions in a day, right? We make them subconsciously. We make them out of habit. Other times we make really large decisions, like who we're going to marry, where we're going to study, what we're going to do, what that ultimate plan is, and then building out a strategy to execute that plan for our lives. Big things. And it can sometimes feel, in the land of the free, home of the brave, we have, we're sitting in the middle of an ocean, and we have all these options, 360 to be exact, right? Which way do we start swimming?
It's overwhelming.
And suddenly these options that were a symbol of freedom now become chains, right? And they can cause us to sink and drown in that ocean, right?
Yeah.
And so before we let that happen, before we let process analysis or indecision take us down, we start to think through various lenses or frameworks or vantage points or aspects, about the decision that we're trying to make, about the fork in the road, which way do we go, right? And one of those mental models, one of those lenses that I think is actually the best place to start is with what not to do. Why? Because when you're not sure what to do, start with what not to do. Start
narrow
there.
The field of view.
Exactly. It's not going to be the end all to the process, but it is the best place to start. And then through your other mental models, your other lenses, your other aspects, vantage points, you're going to be given all the necessary data, color it all in to be able to make the right decision.
Right.
I tell you what, I mean, these are just some lessons I've learned in my life, looking back on wrong decisions. And had I only been able to see the world like this, or had I seen it like this, or had I known this, or had someone just told me to do this, right? And so what I'm hoping to do is to help people swim, to help them start and be able to not drown, not be bound by this idea of unlimited options, but to consider the options and to start to put them on the path of developing a framework, how to think about the world, at least in one sense, from one vantage point, specifically what not to do, that will hopefully help them to mitigate risk, avoid failures, and help to equip them for success ultimately. And man, it's amazing. Sat down with some just neat folks. Everyone has a really cool story. And it's amazing, though, even bigger than that, how eager people are to share, how eager people are to want to talk about their failures, especially when what's on the line is helping someone else in their success.
Yeah.
And so for the folks listening and that will continue to listen, I'm just excited. Like I said, like the podcast is in a first sense about me because I want to learn.
Yeah.
Right. But even more than that, it's really about you, the listener. And I hope you guys walk away every episode in an increasing manner, equipped, affected, and pressed on in your journey for success.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And as we're talking about the audience, who do you see this podcast being a great fit for, and who's it not for? Like who do you think is the right fit for the kind of content you're going to have, the kind of people and stories you're going to be sharing? Who's the fit? Who's the audience?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. It's both narrow and broad, right? So the platform takes the stories of entrepreneurs, leaders, and public figures and gives them a place to share their failures, to equip others for success. So twofold. One, what do I mean by entrepreneurs, leaders, and public figures, right? Well, entrepreneur could be everyone from the big Fortune, 500 CEO, right, or founder, Silicon Valley tech startup guy, to the small mom and pop shop, here in Green Bay that's just trying to get underway, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the entrepreneur is only in his 20s, right? But he's building something, he's experienced failures and successes along the way, and he's willing to share those. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily only people that are, decades down the road for success. The people that could be sharing their failures and stories could also be folks that are younger than you.
Yeah.
And I think it's good to realize that we can learn from folks that are older than us and younger than us, or our peers. A leader could be someone that could be, in middle management. But then maybe they got a team of 10, 5, 10, 100 people that they're leading. They could be a thought leader in their respective industry. They could be someone who has a lot of expertise in their particular role but might not be, in a sense, leading anyone else, but they're a leader in their specific realm of expertise, right? It could also be someone like a pastor or in civil government, right? Someone that's leading a body of people. And then lastly, public figure. Could be an athlete, could be a celebrity, could be, again, civil government of some extent, could be an influencer. And if you'll notice, there's a little bit of overlap in each of these categories. Someone could be, one, two, or all three, right? Yeah. And oftentimes that is the case. But what's the common denominator, the scarlet thread with all these people, is that they have bigger ambitions, and they're striving to build something greater than themselves, right? Whether it's leading others, giving thought, equipping others. It's just amazing. They're looking to inspire others. They've moved from a point of, in a sense, success to significance, where they're wanting to take not only what they've succeeded in, but then parlay that into helping others become successful. So then, who is this for, as far as on the receiving end? You just flip the coin. It's for those that are aspiring to be entrepreneurs, leaders, public figures,
right?
And in that sense, and in all the same ways. And so it could be someone that says, like, maybe maybe you're an accountant in corporate America, and you're like, man, I've always had this idea of, like, instead of building someone else's dream, I want to kind of build my own, but I'm not really sure how to go about it. And I've thought about maybe opening up my own CPA firm or starting to do, contracting work or just kind of stuff off on the side. And they latch onto this, and they hear, someone that talks about starting their own business, maybe in a completely different industry, but it's that spark that they needed to go, right? Or maybe you're a stay-at-home mom, and you're like, I love what I do, love raising the kids, love nurturing them, and I also have, these skills, these passions, and what can I do, and how can I do this? Or you employ business principles to how you rule and manage the home, right? So in a sense, it's narrow and broad. I think because a lot of what's coming through are life principles in so many different ways that can apply to someone who isn't trying to build a Fortune 500 company. Right? They can benefit from that, but it equally applies to those who are. So, what do you think? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, totally.
It's narrow and broad in that sense.
Yeah, and I think that all of us are still aspiring towards something greater.
I hope.
Right? Whether that's something greater for our kids.
Yep.
Something greater for our career. Yep. Something greater in helping others.
Yeah.
Right? But all of that is fraught with uncertainty. All of that is fraught with challenges and risks. And that's what this is about.
Yeah.
I think about a friend of mine who hates his job. Right? Loves his family. Great dad. But he lives for home.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Right? And I think there's this, I see this like inkling within him to want to do more.
Yeah.
But he doesn't know, he's not equipped with how, right? And it's fear, right? Of stepping out, right? And we all struggle with that. And I think the great thing is to be able to hear stories of others who have gone and done that, right? And not unscathed.
Yeah.
Right? Because the hero's journey is fraught with challenges and risks. And what would a movie and a story be without those things?
Yeah.
And I think that so many stories that we hear in retrospect are sugar-coated. You know what I mean? And it's I think that narratives about success are really helpful, but they're also justifying, the decisions they made. It's not meant to really open up and talk about what really happened.
Right.
I think actually, from a society perspective, there are things that just aren't okay to talk about, like that fear of what would people think of me if I share this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right. My wife and I, we had we miscarried a baby. We had twins coming, and we lost them, and we were so excited. And to go from like super high to super low. And the really interesting thing about that is no one wanted to acknowledge it. They wanted to cover it up and say, "Oh, you can have more," or like no one wanted to actually sit there in the pain with us.
Lean into it.
And I think there's other things socially that aren't, acceptable or to talk about. I think failure is one of those big things.
Yeah.
Right?
I think a lot of it has to do with pride. We want to generally look like we've got it all together, and that we've never made a mistake and that kind of stuff, because we care too much about what other people think of us, and that just kind of drives this vicious cycle of fear. We're afraid to do more because we're afraid of what people are going to think about us, and in the meantime, we're constantly covering up those failures because we care too much about what people are going to think about us if we tell about them. But the reality is, and this has actually came out in, you guys will hear this in another episode, but don't be afraid to not be okay, right? Like, it's okay to not be okay. Don't be afraid to say, I'm not okay, I need help, right? If it's reaching up, if it's a personal thing or a professional thing, it's okay to confess that. So at least you can leverage then that place of failure and say, if I continue on, press on my pride here, I'm just going to continue this path of destruction, right? Yeah. Whatever it might be. But I think sometimes pride can have a lot to do with it. We want to look like we have it all together. We want our Instagram face on, that type of thing. Right. Our Facebook face. And, I think this gives that platform for folks just over a cup of coffee, a beer, a cigar, whatever it might be, just to be, in a sense, lean into those failures. And that actually brings up another thing. You guys will hear some background noises. It's what I call Kyle style.
Kyle style.
I'm not interested in having in these conversations. There's other aspects of the podcast that'll be me in my little modest home studio hacking away and polishing things up. But this episode, it's really just face to face, in person, having that kind of conversation. Just like if you're sitting down with someone for the first time because you reached out to them and said, "Hey, I could see myself where you are. Would you help? Would you give me some counsel and advice?" And I really want, I guess the goal is that you guys would be drawn into that conversation. Maybe feel like you're here smoking a stogie with us or sipping on some Texas tea or something. So
yeah.
Hey, this is Kyle. Well done on your decision today to be great. Those are my kiddos in the background. Hey, if you want more of this kind of content, find me on social media. We'll keep the conversation going. You can hit me up on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, @StartWithWNTD. Again, @StartWithWNTD. We'll see you there.
So in the main segment of the podcast, I'm going to be asking three main questions to whoever it is that is sitting down with me. And it's going to be, what did you do right? What did you do wrong? And if you could go back and do it over again, what would you do differently? Or another way to think about that question is going to be, if you're sitting down with someone for the first time that was saying like, "Hey, Ryan, I want to be where you are," how would you counsel them to go about things in a way to avoid the mistakes that you made? And so Ryan and I are kind of thinking, what if failure was a person, And as we kind of talk about this, we're thinking maybe failure's here having a stick with us, smoking with us and joking with us. And but we want to kind of take that question and say, okay, so like, what's the right way to think about failure? What does failure do right? Right? So Ryan, what do you think? I mean, what's the right way to think about failure? How do we approach it? What does failure do right for us?
Well, failure can, as a, like you said, a mentor, right? Failure can help us and teach us and guide us because maybe that path is like treacherous.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's actually really good that I stopped here on the path. Because now I get to shift and move over to this other spot.
I got my face smashed for a reason.
Yeah.
Still a pulse, but
yeah, and on the flip side of that is when it's teaching me in that way,
yeah,
how do I respond?
Yep.
Do I look at myself and say, well, I'm not enough? Do I stop there?
Yeah.
Right? Or do I get back up, dust off the dirt, right? And there's a big social component here because failing privately is very differently than failing publicly. And maybe we can even talk about those two even separately.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So how do you think about what is failure? What's good about failure publicly?
Yeah.
How does, and versus privately?
Yeah, well, I think the right way to think about failure is to think of it as a friend, to think of it as an advantage, to think of it as, like you said, a mentor, a teacher. It's training us to a greater place of maturity if we think about it and approach it that way, right? So thinking of it in that sense, it causes us to lean into it and to press in and start to take a look. Why did I get beat up? Why am I here? Why did this investment, bomb, right? Why did things go awry with my kids, or trying to raise these funds, or whatever it might be, whatever it is. I think failure is good because it brings us to a place of maturity, right? It's a point of testing, a point of battle, a point where we're being pressed, we're being beaten down, and it's not meant to keep us there. We're actually meant to conquer. We're meant to overcome. We're meant to win that fight, right? And I think Grant Cardone, Uncle G, if you're listening to this, which he probably is,
Uncle
right?
G.
I think he says in one of his books, I think 10X rule, you only failed if you quit, right? So it's interesting because I don't mean to dismiss the realities or the technicalities of failure, but I think you can have a macro failure and a micro failure.
Exactly.
Right.
And those are big. Those are very different.
Right. The macro failure is when you just give up and you stop. Right. The micro failure is when you hit that speed bump. Right. So you hit the speed bump as a micro failure, and the only way that you hit the macro failure is if you don't get back up and go over that speed bump. You just quit. You're done. You go home. Take your ball, pick up your ball, and go. Right. No. Right? We're meant to go through those things in life to teach us, to mature us, to make us stronger. I mean, this has been cliche, but it's cliche for a reason. It's exactly like lifting weights. You experience a progressive loading, right, of weight, and you don't go from benching 100 pounds to 300 pounds overnight.
Right.
But you add 5 pounds every workout, and guess what? In a matter of 3, 4, 5, 6 months, guess what you're benching?
Yeah.
300 pounds, right? Your muscles are being ripped and torn apart. They're failing, but intentionally so.
Getting stretched.
But it's making you stronger. And you'd never gone through that proverbial battle, that point of testing.
Yeah.
You would never grow into the source of maturity and strength that you could otherwise.
I like
so
that.
This is the way to lean into and to look at failure as a friend, as a mentor, as a coach, pushing you to go further than what you think you could.
And I love how you phrase that, battle hardened.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, whatever battle you're facing, whether it's lifting weights, you can't go from zero to the top without going through those stages. Right? And pushing through the pain.
Or building a Fortune 500 company. Right. Or doing a newspaper route. Or cold calling for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or getting married. Or having kids. I mean, pick it.
Oh, man.
Pick your situation literally.
Man.
And tell me where you come to the table with all the maturity and strength that you need.
Ready to go. There's no
we're
way.
human. We're imperfect.
As a dad, I feel like a failure so many times, right? And it's like, how does this teach me? What can I do better now? How can I do that better next time?
Right. And so much of it is mindset too. Like when you go back to the physical realm, pushing your body further than what you're, than what you think you can, right? So I guess a big back into my story, I had a stint where I was a firefighter for the city of Minneapolis, right? Big city firefighter.
Really?
Really competitive to get into. Really, I guess you could call it lucky, blessed to get in and to get in the top. One of the places I look back in my life and see that was a success. That was a huge story, and I pushed myself harder than I thought I ever could, mentally and physically. But failure is such a mindset there, because if you stop, right? Even in that story, going in, I wasn't the guy that was going in. It's kind of like they put you through a sort of boot camp, and there's all this training and a lot of physical stuff, a lot of tests. I ended up in the top 1% of recruits, of hires, over 8,000 some people.
Wow.
And that was a huge accomplishment for me. And that's not, it's not me saying, oh, look at how great I am, but it is to show that you push yourself hard, you prepare mentally, physically, spiritually, and you press in, and your body can go further. So then I get into class, and there's guys that are in better shape than I am, right? And even then, I was in really good shape. I had shaved over, I think 2.5 minutes off of my my time for the CPAT, which was like a physical agility test, helped me to place higher. Like that's a big amount of time to shave off, But then you get into rookie school and all that kind of stuff. And I remember the first time, first day, all that kind of stuff. I show up 5 minutes early. The last guy to show up, right? And all these guys were veterans, military guys. I had no idea, And it's like Lombardi says, if you're 10 minutes early, you're 10 minutes later, something like that, And I walk in, it's like, Schmitz, and just getting rammed. You're late, I'm like, first guy, like, oh my gosh, like this and that. And at the end of that day, which was just kind of a bunch of hoopla, just paper stuff and all kind of whatnot, they had us go and run stairs. And we had to go put on the turnout gear, the pants, that kind of stuff, the big boots and whatnot. And these pants were sagging. And I didn't know that part of the strategy to running stairs was to make sure that your pants aren't sagging, Something goofy. Well, I was the absolute last one out of the entire class to make it up the stairs. And even more than that, I had guys that were went to the, captains, because they were from the military. They kind of understood the team thing, and they're like, hey, can I go finish with Schmitz? Can I go run? They finished first, and they wanted to come back and run with me, and I was dead last. I was like, man, that was humiliating, right? I knew I got better than this, and to finish this way and be I can hardly run these stairs. Well, by the end of rookie school, I disciplined myself to work out during my lunch breaks, to go on. And they were already working us out twice a day, on top of a bunch of book stuff. We were reading 120 plus pages a night, studying a bunch of stuff. They kind of crammed, our
this is intense.
Yeah, our EMT studies into like a 5-week period, which is normally at least 3 quarters. I think if I recall right. But I had guys make fun of me. I had this stretching routine that I did. Guys would make fun of me. They'd poke fun of me. I would stay extra to do actually physical stuff, run some stairs, and try to rally teams. And guys would make fun of me. They just kind of poke. And a lot of it's the military thing. If you're going to hang with the guys, you joke with the guys, that type of thing. But I was also really focused, and they weren't, right? Well, by the end of rookie school, we had this skills test, which ran you through, in full firefighter mode, all practical skills. And for those of you guys if you're not familiar, you're probably wearing 60, 70, 80 pounds of equipment total. You're on oxygen, and so while you're getting the air that you need, you don't really feel like you're getting anything when you have that mask on, the positive pressure mask. And then it's running you through to run 6 flights of stairs up and down, and you're carrying a 50-pound hose over your shoulder, maybe 100 pounds, and you're dragging a fully charged hose line, which feels like an elephant. You're doing that 100 yards and back, and then you're chopping wood and all this kind of stuff. It's in how fast you can do it. And I set the record.
Really?
Not only for my class, not only did I finish first, I beat the fittest guy in the class to claim the title. He finished in 5 minutes and 3 seconds. I finished in 5 minutes and 1 second. Not only that, but I set the record for any person that had ever done that skill test ever in the Minneapolis Fire Department.
Wow.
I look back on that, I'm like, yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Nice.
And so I guess that extended story was me showing how you lean into failure. I mean, I failed miserably, and especially that
your pants
day.
Are falling down.
Yeah, and just embarrassing, absolutely humiliating. But did I let that conquer me?
Yeah.
No, I said, let's go, right?
Wow.
And even with despite the jesting and all that kind of stuff, you earn the respect, and guys are like, holy shit, you know what I'm saying? They're like, yeah, wow, Schmitz, good job, that type of thing. And I'm like, yeah, good job, let's go.
Yeah.
And I draw on that experience, and maybe you listeners, maybe you guys have experiences like that. And don't fear failure. Draw back on those experiences you've had in life where you've had those successes and you've proven to yourself you haven't given up on yourself, right? And you can go further than what you think you can.
Yeah.
And draw from that. Lean into it. Use failure as a mentor, as a friend, as a coach, and let it drive you.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so much of what you're talking about is a little bit of tortoise and the hare.
Yeah.
Right? They were way faster. They didn't have to work out. Right? but you pressed on.
Well, some of those guys needed to work out.
I bet. But at the same time, so putting in the extra effort, right?
Yeah.
Letting that drive you.
Yeah.
At the same time, failure is not always an event, right? You came in feeling pretty good,
Yeah.
right? But then you get around these other peers, and everything changes because the standard, right? The standard deviation, the average changes. And now you're at the bottom instead of what you thought was the top before.
Yeah.
And so your peer group changes what you perceive to be failure, even though you, Kyle, didn't change at all.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to think about failure not as just an event or something that happens, but also as a mindset. And I think that
Yeah.
the one thing that I'm taking from your story is that if you're not failing, if you're at the top of your class, the top 1%, right? You could have stayed there. Like that could have been at the top of it, right? Big fish, small pond.
Yeah.
Right? And so failure is also a mindset, because when you walked into that room and all of a sudden, like, wow, these big military guys they're way more experienced. Who we compare ourselves to and what peer group we sit in kind of determines how we feel. Do we feel like we're at the top or at the bottom? And it's awesome that you pushed through that. You didn't let that stop you.
Yeah. It's you don't. And sometimes failures, if we approach them the wrong way, which we'll get into this next, we can start to believe a certain narrative about ourselves, about our capacity, about our ability to do things. And sometimes that comes from other people, right? They look on at our failures and be like, yeah, who's this Schmitz guy thinking, working out at lunch break, doing these goofy stretches, this guy's just a joke,
Right.
He wasn't even in the military. He shouldn't even be here. He shouldn't even be in the top 1%, you don't belong here. Well, guess what? And it's that mindset, right? It's the mindset. And that's so important.
Failure is a friend.
Yeah, failure is a friend.
And a teacher.
And a mentor. And a coach. Failure can be those things.
Fantastic, Kyle.
Hey, so you're still listening, which means you like it? I think so. If you do, share this with somebody else who you think would not only like it, but be helped by it, and join us in our mission to make the world be great.
So failure is friend, but failure can be many different things, right? It doesn't have to be friend. It depends on how we wield it. It's like a double-edged sword, right? So I think failure can be friend to those who wield it as such, but I think failure can also be a foe. And I think this is where a lot of people, going back to your comments earlier, where they approach failure with a fear mindset, a scarcity mindset, they're afraid. They're afraid to fail. They don't take any risks, which is the riskiest position to take, right? Is to take no risks, because all of life is risk, right? So, Ryan, when you think of failure as foe, or how people think wrong about failure, like, talk to me, kind of unpack that for me. How is failure a foe?
Scary. We talked earlier about, public versus private.
Yeah.
It's one thing and we talked about major versus, macro versus micro failure. Failure can get in your head,
Yeah.
It can, if failure is sitting in the room with us, it can be this huge, intimidating thing.
Yeah.
A wall that I can't get around, that I can't, that I can't conquer, right? And it can paralyze you. The narrative you tell yourself in the head really, really matters.
Yeah.
All the things that we all have our own self-talk, right? I'll never be enough. I'll never make it. This is too hard. Why do I even try? Or I don't have what it takes, right? We're all asking that question. And that's viewing failure as foe.
Yeah.
Right. What do you think, Kyle? How do people view failure as foe, and how should we not look at failure?
Yeah. It's almost like failure is that ghost that comes back to haunt you. And it doesn't just haunt you, it taunts you. Right? It reminds you of the past.
Yeah.
It's the great accuser before the judge saying, you don't belong here. Look what you did wrong. This is what you deserve. You don't deserve this. You don't get a second chance. No. There's no way you can move on from this. Right? I think failure is really a ghost. Right? And it's to pit it over against, what's like in the old cartoons where they would have like a demon on one shoulder and an angel on the other shoulder.
Yeah.
In a sense, maybe that's a fine picture for failure. Which is it?
Whichever one you feed.
Right, exactly. And and so the wrong way to approach failure, if people are approaching failure as foe, it's fear-based, right? And they're reminded of all the things that they did wrong, of all the bad ways that people think about them now. And you hit on this before. It's now they start to develop a narrative about themselves.
Yeah.
And they start to believe that. And what we believe comes out of our fingertips. So they literally start becoming the very story or the very version of themselves that they've been preaching and teaching and speaking to themselves. It's a scary thing, but it's a principle just in the world that we generally become what we behold, right? Or we become the things that we love. Yeah. The things that we focus on and give our time and attention to, we become more and more like those things. And so people should consider if that one of the things that they're constantly beholding in life is their failures, and not failure as a friend and leveraging it and moving on from it, failure as a coach spurring them on, but as a foe, they're becoming less and less human. They're becoming less and less of themselves. They're literally going into this process of self-destruction because they're letting this ghost haunt them and taunt them and literally destroy them. Right? It could be someone, someone who's sitting in corporate America. Maybe it's like the example before. A guy's an accountant. He wants to go off and do his own practice, but he tried that once. It didn't work.
Right.
Or maybe his dad failed. And he's reminded of that failure and how much pain it caused. How much pain it caused him as the son. He's too afraid to go and to risk it again. But he doesn't realize that position, I'm trying to say, no, not for me, is actually riskier, right? And like you said before, people then start to tend to justify their actions. They've given up on themselves. And rather than just saying that, they'd rather try to justify and be like, well, hey, Ryan, you should just settle down. Kyle, you should just... Right. Why are you always so driven to try to be successful?
Right.
Why do you just be content with who you are and where you're at in life? No, you've just given up on yourself, and you've given up on your own dreams and ambitions, and you're feeding yourself a narrative that's really based on fear of failure. And frankly, I don't need that. So we both experience failure. We're just leveraging it in different ways,
right? And
we're not afraid to go back out and get beat up again, right? And then take that and learn from that, and eventually we'll find success, right? But it's that process of maturity and that path. And so just for folks listening, this isn't any kind of knock on being in corporate America, any kind of knock on working a job and helping to build the dream of another CEO or founder. That's not a bad thing. There's definitely a place in the world for that, for sure. And it doesn't mean that if you don't want to go start your own business or something like that, then that you're not aspiring to more, or that you're necessarily viewing failure as a foe, right? But it is a good point to stop and look and say, okay, in your respective role, wherever you're at, are you striving to be a leader? Are you striving to do what you do with excellence, right? Are you striving to bring more than what you ask for the company that you work for? If not, have you thought about going and doing your own thing, right? But a lot of it, again, has to do with the mindset, has to do with the narratives that we believe about ourselves, our own potential for capacity, and whether we actually think we're capable of more or less, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think there's failure in two dimensions on a time scale. One is failure of the past. It's reviewing, I play this scene over and over in my head where I was, it was senior year, homecoming soccer game, I'm goalie, and
homecoming king?
No, I wasn't homecoming king. And
you are a good-looking guy, though. People should know that.
We both have beards. Kyle's looks better. And one of the things that I play in my head over, since this happened, whenever revert into the failure as foe is, one of the my fellow teammates was kicking it back to me, and somehow it rolled right past me and right into the net. And oh my gosh, everyone's there. It's totally embarrassing. It's at home. It's homecoming, and we're gonna lose. Now we're gonna lose because of this simple thing. And I can look at that and say, well, wow, Ryan, you suck. Right? Like, that's one way to play it.
You don't belong here.
You don't belong
look
here.
What you did.
Right, look what you did, you little jerk, right? Yeah, and so how we look at our own failures in the past, how do we reframe that, our past, is one question that we'll be tackling in the podcast. And the other one is fear of failure in the future, right? Like, what if questions. If I do this, which is paralyzing in some way. Either I don't have what it takes based on what the past, or I'm afraid of what's going to happen, if I do. And some things that we'll talk more about is how to mitigate risk, learn from these stories, but how to take acceptable risk. Is a different thing, right? How do I actually reduce the cost of failure?
And that's exactly, hence the title, What Not to Do. One of the greatest ways you can mitigate risks is start with what not to do, right?
You're right.
As you glean those principles, it won't be exhaustive for you. It's not the only way to mitigate risk, but it's a great place to start, right? Hey, I'm going to go, build my own, company, or I'm going to go become a pastor or a leader, or I want to go be the mayor of a city, or hey, I want to be an athlete, right? Great. Let's start with what you shouldn't do. On that journey, on that path that you've decided now, and as you're building out your plan, let's give you a handful of things what not to do. Avoid these things, and you're going to be golden, right? Great. Does that answer everything? No. But it helps to narrow, like you said, that field of vision, that view, so you can get more and more focused. And in the meantime, you've mitigated risks. You mitigated failures. Why? Because you humbled yourself and you asked. You asked about what other people did wrong who took that same path, and now you can avoid it. You don't have to. You're going to have your own dragons to slay. You're going to have your own speed bumps to hit. Great. You're going to be much better equipped, prepared to conquer those things, because you're not going to get hit in mile 1.
Right.
You're going to have some dangers in mile 3, 4, and 5, right?
Right.
But you're going to be fine here.
Yeah, and I think it has to also do, like, if you're running a marathon, or when you see that water station, right? Like, sometimes you just heads down. This is really hard. The goal is so much further away, right? Than maybe I should just stop, right? Like, you're struggling with.
Is it really worth it?
Yeah, and the amazing thing happens is when you see that water station or whatever it is, or that mile marker, your head kicks up, and you have and then you actually speed up, right? You start running faster because now you have the eye on the goal.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important is the hope, of just the next mile marker is inspiring.
Yeah.
And so if you're listening to this and you've failed recently, you're in good company, right? We're gonna talk about that. And you're not gonna feel
yourself, but.
What?
I said speak for yourself.
Speak for yourself. But part of this is you're not alone.
No.
You're not alone in that.
No.
If you're stuck in a corporate job and you want more in life and you're not sure, you're not. If you're aspiring for something more, then I hope this inspires you.
Or even if you're in the corporate job and you say, hey, I really would like to be CEO one day, but I'm the janitor.
Yeah.
Right. Or hey, I would really like to manage the team and be the director for sales nationally or internationally. Right. How do I get there? Right. That's great. Like, you don't have to get out of your job. But I think we all have a moral obligation to be as successful as possible, because it's what's best for the world. It's what's best for our family, ourselves, and then those around us. Right. And if we take on that first kind of ethical sense of like, hey, I have gifts, skills, and abilities, and I'd be robbing the world around me if I didn't try to employ those to the best of my ability. I'm stealing. I'm stealing from the world around me. I'm stealing from my employer, my family, myself.
If I'm too comfortable, if I'm not giving my absolute best, you're hitting on something like really, really key.
Yeah.
Which is
maybe people turn off the podcast right now because
which is like why.
But it's true. It is true.
Failure is only worthwhile if I'm chasing something greater. And you're talking about like this even moral obligation.
Yeah.
To fellow man.
To be successful. And no one should be ashamed about that, right? Now, of course, we can make an idol out of anything, right? But just because someone wants to be successful and build wealth and do more good in the world doesn't mean that they're necessarily vain or selfish or all that kind of stuff. I actually think it's the opposite. I think it's one of the most selfless things you can do. You're honest and aware of what your current skills and abilities are. You're going to launch yourself on a path to master whatever it is, to achieve a level of mastery, whatever your calling or your skills and abilities are, right? You've got the goal in mind, the end goal in mind. You've got a plan to get there. Go. Don't stop. Right, you have a moral obligation to be as successful as you can in that possibility, and that path. Otherwise, go do something else. And guess what? You still have the moral obligation to be as successful in that as possible, right? And again, the biggest thing is you're robbing the world. You're robbing your own family and your own children and your grandchildren. But the biggest thing, I think, is you're robbing yourself. And it goes back to that narrative, what you believe about yourself, what you believe about your potential, your capacity. And I think it comes all the way back down to, at the heart of it, a fear of failure. You're viewing failure as a foe, not a friend.
All right, I'm curious. You tell me, which entrepreneur, which leader, which public figure do you want to hear from? Who do you want to sit down with me, not only share their successes, but lean into their failures? Why? To help equip you for success. Send me a note, tag them in this, have them reach out to me, and the sky's the limit. Let's go. Let's get who you want on What Not to Do.
Oh, man, this is good stuff. These cigars are great.
They really are.
Yeah, I mean, it's just delicious. The whiskey.
I'm usually not a
bourbon. Knob Creek smoke maker.
Knob Creek.
Yeah.
I'm usually not a cigar guy, but you turned me on to this thing.
We can change that.
Yeah, because I like pipe tobacco. It smells great.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
This has got what in it now?
So we're smoking a Fat Bottom Betty. I want to say it's by Deadwood Cigar Co. They're out of North Dakota, I think. But I might have botched that. But it's a cigar, and if the listeners know anything about cigars, you're basically smoking the wrapper. And the wrapper is pipe tobacco leaf. So it's naturally sweeter and smells like a pipe tobacco. So it's like a pipe meets a cigar, and it's absolutely delicious. So if you're new to cigars, and I still consider myself a bit of a novice, but I know enough to know that if you're not a big cigar person, but you're open to it and you like pipe tobacco, this is a great intro cigar. It's a little bit sweeter and delicious and good price point. Deadwood Tobacco Co.
Cool.
We'll give them some free advertising.
Yeah, there you go.
And we're at Prohibition Cigar and the Spirits, I think. I'm not sure exactly what the official is, but Prohibition Cigar Lounge on Broadway here in Green Bay, Wisconsin. It's amazing. Like, I talk to a lot of guys that come through here. I'm probably here once a week. Guys from all over the country come here, and they're like, you know what? This is one of the best lounges in the world. It's amazing. So, and you kind of see it's like that industrial kind of rehab thing, but great leather furniture.
Oh, man, this leather.
Kind of what you think of when you think of, like, cigar lounge. Like, you want to come here, open up a book.
Yeah.
Bring some guys or whatever. Work here. Yeah, work here, exactly. So if you guys are ever coming through Green Bay, Wisconsin, and I don't care if you've never smoked a cigar in your life, we can change that. Connect with me, and let's come have a stick here and talk about what not to do. With that said, so we talked about how to think rightly about failure, right? We've talked about how to think wrongly about failure. I want to talk about how we should be thinking differently about failure. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the biggest places to start is actually taking full ownership, assuming total ownership of the failure. So, like, sometimes in our day and age, like, when people say, like, oh, failure is just, failure doesn't exist. It's not a failure, it's a lesson, or I forget all that kind of stuff. And I get the point. I think sometimes what happens with that is that they actually dismiss the actual technical failure. And if you do that, you can never actually learn from it. If you never actually acknowledge and assume total ownership and say, yep, I let that soccer ball roll right by me. My head wasn't in the game or whatever it was, or yep, I didn't prepare and had saggy pants and finished dead last in the stairs.
Up the stairs.
It doesn't matter what the failure in life was, or I bombed and I totally mishandled the investment capital that was given to me. And you go and apologize to your investors, or whatever the story is, right? You can't actually use failure as a friend, a coach, or a mentor unless you're willing to assume total ownership for the failure, right? And so what we don't want to do is, by calling failure a friend, is distill it or water it down to where we can't actually learn from the technical aspects of the failure itself, right? Because that's really important, because we need to know what we did wrong technically so we can not make that same technical mistake later, right? And we do that by assuming total ownership. And say, yep, that was me. That's exactly what I did wrong, right? And now that I know that it was me and I did that wrong in that way, great. How can I do that differently next time, right? And so that starts with assuming total ownership. And, and whether it's like you had talked earlier about people not wanting to talk about their failures, that's really just another way to say they're not willing to take ownership of their failures. They don't want to talk about it because they don't want to take ownership of it. The less that people know, the better. If they're sweeping on the rug, it's okay, let's just go away. But it's just like that festering. Like, if you kept your house that way, like, think about the, scary creatures that would come crawling out of your rug at night, or whatever.
Right.
Just, you don't want that, right?
Right.
And I think a lot of people are haunted by their failures because they're not taking ownership for them. So anyway, let's riff on that for a little bit here. What do you think? How do people approach failure differently?
Yeah, I think that...
or how should they approach it differently?
In the software world, in the innovation world, something that we work to do is we operate in, call them sprints.
Yep.
Okay? And a sprint is, let's say, could be a week, could be 2 weeks, some teams more than that.
Yeah.
But a sprint is actually a really powerful concept, right? It's like the mile markers on your way to something bigger.
Yep.
Right? Like we talked about that marathon, right? But when you have a short duration, achievable duration of something from here to there, it was 2 weeks, then you can kind of stop at the end of that 2 weeks period and reflect. And, there's the actual exercise called a retrospective. And a retrospective is, what went well, and celebrate what went well. Heck yeah, high fives all around, right? And celebrate that, because often we don't even do that enough.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if you buy a new car, looks amazing, but you notice one scratch, oh my gosh. That's like, and you forgetting all the amazing things that are actually all there. And somehow we naturally kind of gravitate towards the negative or towards the imperfections.
Yep. You know what we do? We microscope it. So there's a difference between a telescope, which makes something that looks small appear as big as it actually is. And then there's a microscope, which takes something that is actually really, really small and microscope it and makes it appear a lot bigger than what it is.
Wow.
And that's the process that you're describing, is how do we look at things. And what you're saying is, we just bought a new car. Let's not microscope this thing.
And it's amazing.
right? Let's telescope this thing. This is an awesome thing. Maybe we saved up for it, all that kind of stuff, or we're leasing the car of our dreams, or whatever the approach is. This is an awesome car, or it's serving our family well, or whatever it might be. And it's yes, so pumped, and you get a little nick. Don't microscope that thing.
Yeah,
the nick is a bummer, but it shouldn't eclipse.
Right.
The glory and the joy of having this new run.
Right. I love that. So I think celebrating wins, we're talking about, is a really big deal.
Yeah.
We need to do that more.
Yep.
At the same time, we have to be honest with ourselves.
There's a scratch in the
and own it.
Yeah.
Own the mistakes, right? And so the next part of the retrospective is what didn't go so well.
What went wrong, yeah.
Right? And just framing that. And being open and totally honest with yourself. That's one scope
Yep.
Another scope is with your team.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, hey, what didn't go so well?
Yep.
And the third one is you can't just stop there.
Yep.
You can't stop with, well, what didn't go so well, because that doesn't create change.
Yeah.
So one of the most powerful things to do is, what can I do better next time? Right? I'm going to pull up my pants, wear better suspenders, right? And reframe how you're going to approach the next challenge. Because I think so often we get stuck in the rearview mirror, right? It's what went wrong.
Yep.
And reframing that to, what can I do better next time? And it's looking forward, it's bringing your head up, getting that next milestone visible, getting excited about it, but being conscious about how to do it differently, how to do it better this time around. One of the things in that same world that got a lot of bad rap is, on the innovation side, like lean startup is a buzzword. There's lots of buzzwords.
Yeah.
But lean startup being one of them. It's a super great concept. I mean, the principles are really amazing. However, it got a lot of flack for introducing the word failure. And people got fixated on it as if, like, fail fast. We use words like that. Fail fast, yeah.
Fail fast, fail hard.
Right.
Yeah.
But people, I think, got fixated on the failure word too much. And they made it more than it was intended to be, which is like, the goal isn't failing. The goal here in testing something or experimenting or trying something new, the goal isn't failure.
Yeah, the long play is not failure.
Right. Like there's a bigger vision there.
Yeah.
So I think reframing that to say, well, actually, I'm experimenting here.
Yep.
That's really what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that, can we break big things down into components, into things we can try, different avenues and paths we can explore, right? And I think failure and mistake, right? People will use the word mistake. They're more comfortable with that than they are with this word failure.
Right.
And because failure, it almost has like a period after it. Failure. It's so terminal.
It's a dead end.
It's killer. And the way I think we should all think about it differently is it's not the end, it's the beginning, right? It's like, failure is not the end of something. It's, if we view things as an experiment, right, or this instance of something, then it opens up so many more possibilities of when I do it next time, or I'm gonna try it this way or work it this route.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like some of the old stories, where you come to this, great, canyon or chasm that separates two cliffs, and there's no apparent bridge. But you were told by the wizard or whoever,
Oh yeah,
that there was a magical bridge, and you just had to, just keep going, and it'll be there. But it looks like there's nothing there, but it's there. And I think failure is sometimes like that. Failure is a bridge, but it takes faith to actually move through it and go over it, because it looks like you're just going to fall right off the cliff.
It's the Indiana Jones scene.
Yeah. So it's like, right, you sprinkle the dust on there, and it's like, oh, it's there. And the temptation is just to turn around, because like, oh, it's a dead end. Oh, there's no way through this. I guess we're just done, and let's go do something else. Well, no. And I've heard failure likened to as like a speed bump or all that kind of stuff. It's yeah. I mean, I guess failure isn't so much the end goal. It's not the result. It's not the final destination.
Right.
It's just part of the process. You expect it, and so yeah. I mean, we don't want an over glorified sense of failure. That's if we're going to think of how we need to think differently about failure, let's assume total ownership of it. But let's not give it more weight than what it's due. Let's not give it a bigger title than what it's due. Right? Yeah. Let's not microscope it, make it look a lot bigger than what it actually really is.
Yeah.
Let's keep our eye on the prize and remember, where we're headed to. Like if it's Elon Musk, it's Mars, right? You need a telescope to view that bad boy, and it looks glorious when you do, right? That's where we're going, right? Yeah, we're gonna have some speed bumps in the way, but let's not microscope those things.
Yeah, and if we're not failing, then we're not really trying.
Yeah.
Right? And that means we're not pushing ourselves.
Yeah. So you actually and maybe unwittingly, but you mapped out my main segment for the podcast. What'd you do right? What'd you do wrong? What would you do differently? The same idea of that kind of retrospective, as you called it, in the software world. I mean, it's exactly the hope of this podcast, right? And we're going to be doing those retrospectives on a lot of folks that come through and are willing to lean into their failures and answer those questions for us. And they're doing it, again, for us, for you, the listeners, so that we can be greater equipped for success, which is amazing.
All right, so you tell me, do we need more conversations like this? Do we need more folks helping us to consider failure as a friend or a foe and helping us to avoid the same pitfalls and failures that they made so that we can go further, faster in our own journey towards success? If this is worth it to you and you want to put your money where your mouth is, you can really help us out over at patreon.com/whatnottodo, and feel free to give as much as you think that this project is worthy of your support. And anything that you're willing to give is such a blessing to us. And thank you.
Well, my cigar went out from too much yapping. But we're in our last segment here, and I'm curious, like we all have influences that shape us. Sometimes, things that we're not even aware of shape us. Circumstances, life, all that kind of stuff. We all have mentors, sometimes direct, parents, teachers, coaches, bosses, whoever it might be, spouses. But they could also be indirect, folks that we learn from reading, from books, that kind of stuff. Maybe people that we had never have met in our lives before. Maybe they're people from history. But they shape us, influence us in radical ways. And that's good. So, like, Ryan, for you, who have been some of those really important influences throughout your life that have helped to shape not just, not just what not to do, not just failures, but your general success in life and just you as a person?
Yeah, when I failed a startup, we'll talk more about that in a different episode, but like I took that really, really hard. And the thing that, and some of the things that really inspired me, some of those thinkers on the business side of things for me were guys like Steve Blank.
Yep.
Really, really great guy. He teaches at Stanford. And also, right after him, one of his proteges was Eric Ries. And these guys, like, when I got into that line of thinking, it completely changed how I viewed failure. It completely changed how I viewed, what I should do first or second. You talked about the 360, right?
Yeah.
There's all these things I could be doing. Like, if I'm aspiring to something greater, where do I start, or which way do I head?
Yeah.
And those guys really gave me kind of a framework or a mental model that I've stuck to, that I've really have dived really deep on.
Yeah.
So I would say those guys for sure kind of changed my trajectory and how I frame failure and what it means and how I approach it, and to get a narrower scope. It would help me get a narrower scope out of the 360 degrees, right? Where my true north would be.
Yeah.
What first steps to take.
Yeah.
Who are some of the ones that have influenced you?
Yeah, so a few years back, stumbled across Charlie Munger. So a long time, friend and
Warren Buffett guy,
and advisor to Warren Buffett. Some would say the genius behind Buffett, but so equal in his own rights in a lot of ways. And there's a book. I don't know that if it was written by Munger. I don't think it was by Munger, but it highlighted a lot of Munger's thinking, and I think it was called something like Investing, the Last of the Liberal Arts.
Wow.
And it advocated, just for our listeners, if you don't know kind of the premise of liberal arts, it's that they teach you broadly across various subjects, and different liberal arts programs focus on different things. But they generally, the aim is to teach broadly so that you can be equipped to make good decisions, think analytically, problem solve, have the tools of learning, no matter which industry or which realm of expertise you decide to go into. It's trying to equip you the best
with the big picture,
not specializing, but to have a very analytical approach, creative problem solving approach, so you can go crush it. Because you can teach anyone the book stuff, right? You don't need 4 years to learn the book stuff, unless you're going to be maybe like an engineer or doctor or something very specialized. So anyway, the book is drawing out that concept and how investing is actually employs the concepts of liberal arts, where you have to be broadly read, and it highlights a bit of Munger and Warren Buffett's way of thinking, but dives into this idea of mental models. And it was the first time I had ever heard that phrase.
Yeah.
And but it really made sense on how how as we go through life we accumulate different ways to view the world or different mental models, and it helps us to make better decisions when we're trying to make decisions. Now, we use mental models when we figure out which toothpaste to buy, right?
Sure.
But that's not, those are things that we're doing subconsciously. The idea is like when we have bigger decisions in life, and we're not sure what to do, having mental models that can help us begin that process of figuring out what we should do are helpful. And I've learned, through that process, that one of the best mental models to start with is what not to do, right? And so that's the whole premise of the podcast. Not sure what to do? Start with what not to do, right? Why? Because hindsight's 20/20. And so those guys, Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett, guys I've never met, but hey, let's get them on the podcast, right? I would love it. That's actually my goal, is to have to be able to sit down with Warren Buffett, have a cigar with him, and talk. And I've learned so much from him. Nowhere near his level of success, but I hope to be one day. I think we need more Warren Buffetts in the world who make a lot of money and give most of it away. I think that's so cool, and I hope that you're inspired by that as well too.
The cool thing about Warren Buffett is, great investor, very smart mind, but beyond that is he's not operating each of these individual businesses, right? Like, he empowers and trusts all the CEOs and their teams to make their own decisions.
And he spends like 4 hours or 6 hours a day reading. And people are like, well, he can do that because he's a billionaire. Well, he's been doing that his entire life. And I was like, man, if I could do anything. I remember I watched a documentary on him once, and he said, find the job that you would love doing if you didn't need one. And I was like, I want to be like Warren Buffett, like the way he thinks about the world, the way that he can build wealth, and
curiosity in you
to build value, to prize so much learning from others and learning broadly, that you would commit 4 to 6 hours a day reading. Like, what joy! We need more of that in the world, to a large extent, and so cool. Someone more recently, Grant Cardone. Grant Cardone, if you're listening to this, which I'm sure you are, because I know, Grant, that you love to start with thinking about what not to do, and but I would love to have you on the podcast. If you guys know Grant, or tag him in the comments, I would love that. That'd be so great. And he's all the way down in Miami, Aventura, but that'd be great. But he talks quite a bit about that idea of failure, and I think I mentioned it earlier. But it's not failure until you quit. So you've got the micro failures where they're real failures, and you got the macro failure, which is where you just give up, you just stop. I love his story. He gets a lot of haters. People spin him the wrong way, but he lost his dad when he was young. He knew he always wanted to be wealthy because he saw the benefit of making a lot of money. He wanted to help more people. And even from his mom and brothers and other folks just told him to stop. He got into drugs, got almost beat to death. And, even after that point, he got into rehab, and his counselor was like, you're never going to do anything in life. Just give up on the dreams of building wealth and all that kind of stuff, and just be content, be satisfied with who you are. And he was the one who taught me first that success is a moral obligation. We have a duty to be successful. And it blew me away. I'd never thought about success like that. But it made so much sense. Like when you think about the gifts and skills and abilities that you have, we are literally robbing ourselves, our families, and the world around us, our very neighbors, when we could be giving them so much more and making the world a better place by really unleashing as much as our capacity is, our excellence in the world, our own success. It doesn't have to be a vain thing. It's actually one of the most selfless things that we can do, and to see it as a great responsibility. And then we look around and be like, man, I've really not taken ownership of this. I really actually shirked my responsibility to be successful. And another way to say that, I just haven't loved people well. You know, like it's like, and when you just get real with yourself, it's amazing. So then with Grant's story, like he now I think manages like 1.2 billion, 1.5 billion in assets under management. If you know him, he's got a couple different businesses, and one of his biggest is his real estate company, and it's just amazing, and I love it. And he's like, he always says like, my haters, you know, people hate me, all that kind of stuff. They hate me for whatever it is, and he's like, I shouldn't be here. You can't hate me. You can't hate me. I never should have been here. I should have been dead.
Wow.
You know, by all statistics, all odds, and so what, you know, take him, leave him. He's the uncle you never had that's going to give you a nice swift kick in the mouth when you need it, and you probably need it more than you think you do. So at least I do.
Yeah,
a couple guys to go consider.
It's super inspiring to hear a story like that.
Yeah,
when you could have given up, you should have given. Like everyone's telling you, you'll never amount
You had
to
every
it.
reason to stop.
But he did.
No.
And this moral obligation for success. I think we hit on it earlier, but maybe we could talk a little bit more about failure isn't the end, right? It's the beginning. It's along the journey. But you're talking about this obligation. You kind of phrase it like that. Of we need to be our best, not just for ourselves but for others. Yeah. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I mean, so we've
Why do we have to be our best, Kyle?
Yeah, so we've been given gifts, right? So God He's equipped us, He's given us gifts, He's given us skills, right? And He said, in a sense, now we are stewards of these things, right? He's given us a world to cultivate, to develop, right? So, like, yeah, life on Mars, like, let's go build a colony there, but, like, let's start with planet Earth, you know what I'm saying? Like, let's really develop this. Actually, Peter Thiel had a great article in the magazine First Things. I think I posted on LinkedIn the other day, but talking about how we're stuck in this place right now where we just keep on doing remakes of remakes of remakes, and we're stuck in this big, massive remix. And he's like, and he mentioned that. He's like, yeah, you know, doing stuff on Mars would be really, really cool, but we got a lot of work left to do here on Earth, you know? And I think that comes from why haven't we? Right? Like, why? Like, we still have so much to cultivate, to develop, to explore. But you think about this, like, everything needed, you know, to build a McDonald's was buried in the earth of the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? Like, who knows? Like, so, like, now you look in your backyard. Like, what's there? Like, what's underneath that grass? What elements? What metals? What resources to build the next thing? To build the colony on Mars.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. And when people think like it's you know, like obligation, like we think like, oh, duty, like drudgery, you know, begrudging obedience. No, like it's duty, but it's also delight.
Yeah.
And the two are, you know, two sides of the same coin. Like, we have an obligation, but it's also where we draw the most satisfaction and joy in life.
Yeah.
And we actually see, like, life is so much more about me. And when I start to really just pour out and give everything that I am, it's a blessing to myself, my family, and the world around me. And if I don't, guess what? I'm robbing myself, my family, and the world around me. And so for people to see that, you know, clearly and plainly, and really start to live up to their potential and their capacity as they've been gifted and created, right? And we all start in different places, right? It doesn't mean you've mastered everything. So, but continue down that path and have that goal, and think bigger, dream bigger, right? It'd be better. And this is another thing that I learned from Grant was, it'd be better to fall short of a massive goal than a small one. Right? So if my goal was to have $1 billion in real estate, it'd be better to fall short of that goal and end up with $800 million,
right,
than to have a goal of $100 million in real estate and end up with $8 million or $80 million. Right? What would you rather fall short of? Right?
Right.
But if you're going to set the limits, if you're going to set the ceiling, right? And so many of us live like so close to the floor, always trying to conserve, always trying to conserve. There's only so much you can conserve. It's like we're all hovering, crawling around on the floor, thinking that how small the world is. It's like stand up. You're like, how many miles before we even break the atmosphere? Like there's, and I think like one of the ditches here is like think that you can be anything in life you want to be. Well, you can't. You're not going to be able to make yourself grow another foot. I mean, you can lose some pounds or whatever it is, but like there's certain things you can't change, and you need to just be honest about those things. That said, given the right environment, the right training, the right education, the right exposure to things, there's so much more that you can be, right? So don't believe a lot that you can only do this, that, or the other thing. You can actually be so much more. And when you realize that, and you marry that with this duty and delight of being as successful as possible, building as much wealth as possible, so that you can be a blessing not only to yourself, but to your family and to the world around you, to future generations, to children yet unborn, right? I mean, think about that. 10 generations from now, who's going to be thanking Ryan Hatch for the work that he did in the world, right? And are you living and planning and running your businesses and your practice, yourself, your family, with that in mind? And I think that's really at the heart of this podcast, and why I hope you guys keep listening, is because there are future generations at stake. The well-being of the world, when you are long gone, is at stake with how you assume this, total ownership, not only for your failures, but for your success, right? And it starts with getting real about where we've gone wrong. And it starts about learning from others and putting the pride aside and being humble and saying, like, look, I don't have it all figured out, and I want to be here. Will you help me, right? And I have the joy of being able to broker that relationship, broker that conversation.
One of the things that got me was, if being complacent is an easy thing to do, right? And we all fall in it.
Yeah.
And
path of least resistance.
Right. And I think that in any job that we have, any role we have, that's a tempting thing to fall into.
Yep.
And when I'm working with companies, I often see, like, if you're inside corporate, for instance, you think you're working with just internal customers. I'm just serving the next department, or I have to, you're working with people inside your company. But I think much more powerful is to think about your role in serving external customers.
Yeah.
Right? Is that your work matters. Right? If you stop milking the cow, then when I open the fridge, there's no cereal. There's no eggs. There's no pancakes. There's no, right? Like
skim milk. This is milk.
It's an amazing thing to acknowledge that, our work has meaning.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We have purpose, and I think
and beyond ourselves.
Right. If God is the creator and he created man in his image, then we were born to create.
Yeah.
I think that's a very powerful statement. It's like, wow, we have so much potential
and capacity,
right? And we're all created differently, right? You're musical, I'm not very much, right? But so we're all dimensioned differently, right? On where we are fit to do to create. But being complacent isn't helpful to yourself, right? No. And it isn't helpful to those around you.
Right.
And so what can we aspire to that's worth failing for?
Yeah.
Wow. What's worth failing towards? And
is it big enough that if we fail, it's still a success?
It's still worth it.
Yeah. So so Grant talks about this in his book 10X. 10X it. You want to make $1 million this year? Make your goal $10 million. Right? Why not? Yeah. I mean, if you want to just be reductionistic, why not? Why not 10 million? Oh, it's not realistic. Really? Do you know anyone else that's making 10 million in the world? Oh, well, yeah. Great. Now you know it's possible.
Yeah.
Right? Do the math, right? There's another thing. When you talk about success, sometimes you just have to do the math. You want to make $1 million this year? Great. Find 10,000 people you can sell a product or a service for $100. That's it. Oh. Well, it's not that easy. Well, actually, it is.
And all it starts with is finding one person to buy something for $100.
Right. So when we demystify, and then you realize, well, actually, $1 million I used to think that was a lot of money, but man, it's not that much money. That
Right.
goes fast.
Right.
You know? And then this is again like I love like Warren Buffett, you know, and the guys that have made so much money, but they also give so much away. Yeah, I guess to share with my listeners, like it's a personal goal of mine to be able to one day I've built enough wealth where I can live off of 10% and give away 90, right? And this is part of that plan to get there, and that's exciting to me, and I hope that's inspiring to you guys to say you take, you know, not only your failures seriously, but also your success. You see it as a duty and a delight, and you want to go and give it your all to fulfill your capacity, so you can be a blessing not only to yourself, but to your family, to the world around you, and to future generations, to a world that doesn't yet exist.
A world that needs more of you.
Yeah, absolutely. You're here for a purpose, right? So aspire, live up to that purpose.
So what is your purpose? And are you living up to it? Or are you barely keeping your head above water in the middle of the ocean, not sure which way to swim? Friends, when you're not sure what to do, start with what not to do, because hindsight is 20/20. Thank you so much for making us a part of your day, of your commute, of your week, of your life. And if you found this helpful, and even in the least bit, share it with a friend. One of the best ways you can help to share this is by giving us a 5-star review and helping us to get the word out that we even exist. Well, it's been said that good men learn from their own mistakes, but great men, they learn from the mistakes of others. So go and be great, and we'll see you next time.